All right, welcome. Today's study tip. In anything you study, some things are going to be more important than others. So try to identify and prioritize these items and build your studies around them. So in other words, the bigger topics, the more difficult topics that we're focused on, you want to make sure to give yourself more time to study those. And then other things you don't need to spend as much time on. You probably do this already, but maybe just make sure to really emphasize the portions that we really emphasize in lecture. And one way to do this is to notice where the instructor is spending a lot of time, or if there's a lot of slides about a particular topic, right? Pay attention to the main concepts. Whenever steps are given, this is a really good clue here. Whenever steps are given, you should definitely know them in order. And if explanations are given, you'll want to know that too. I don't know why this is not working. Here we go. So let's see what we think about this. Not dark enough. Let's make that better. Okay, that's just a pencil, I think is what's, there we go. Okay, so today my recording is on an iPad, which I do not own, so I don't know how to use it very well, as you can tell. Okay, so that is the study tip. The other study tips I've been telling you all semester is use those end of the chapter questions. And sometimes there's questions throughout the chapter, like at each little section of information, and those are helpful too. Another thing that we've talked about before is trying to teach the concept or explain the concept to someone else, even if no one's there, but the practice of saying it out loud, having to form those complete sentences and carry a thought through fully is a really good practice. Another way to practice that would be to practice writing out full sentences. And for all of this, you want to do that without using any notes. Don't cheat, right? See how much you actually remember. And so that is testing yourself, right? And it'll both help you to test what you remember, but it'll also help you to catch if you actually understand it or not. Because remember, I've said a lot, following along with a lecture usually will be easy. Doing it from scratch yourself is a whole nother game. All right. Now, next. Okay. So today is all about the digestive system. There are two parts today's lecture, and then we're actually borrowing this for the second half. We're going to borrow Dr. Hayes's lecture just for time's sake. You do want to go through every time there's anatomy, go through and make sure you remember all the things you learned in your anatomy course. We won't necessarily use every part of the anatomy, but everything you see here, the simplified look at anatomy, we will definitely use. Okay, so functions of the digestive system, as you're probably familiar with, you have motility. This is simply getting the food from your mouth all the way through to digest it. You need to move it through to all the different parts of the digestive system until it finally comes out the other end, right? So this is simply the action the muscles involved in moving it down and through. Those same muscles that move it all the way through also help mix, and that's really important so that the enzymes responsible for digestion can access all of the food. If you were to just keep it as one blob, you would be digesting from the outside in, and it would not be efficient. It would take a lot longer. To safely move and mix everything through, you're going to need different parts of the digestive system to secrete things like water, buffers, enzymes, and mucus. Mucus helps keep things going smoothly without damage to your epithelial lining. Of course, enzymes are responsible for the actual digestion, and buffers help make sure that you maintain the pH that the enzyme needs, right? So this is going to help you get your optimal pH for your enzyme. Okay, and then we could say that digestion. This is the breakdown or catabolism of the food from large macromolecules into their smallest form. Usually the smallest form is called mono, what do we call it? Monomers, right? But with fats, we don't really call the fatty acid and glycerol monomers. So that's why I'm using the more generic term of the smallest unit. And I would say not just usually by hydrolysis, always by hydrolysis, as we've seen in previous chapters. Carbohydrates will then be broken down to their monomer called monosaccharides. Proteins will be broken into their monomer called amino acids. And then fats, we don't use the word monomer, but they're broken into, for each lipid, it's going to be a glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Okay, now you've seen this before. It may have looked a little different, but that's okay. So take this maltose. Maltose is a disaccharide, and it looks like this. You do not need to memorize the picture of the molecule. But just like I said, with that splitting apart with water, the hydrolysis, you're going to need water, and then you're going to need the specific enzyme that's able to break this bond here and add the water back. And so where did the water go? It went here and here, right? So with the use of an enzyme, we're able to put water onto this maltose to split it into the individual monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are the monomer of carbohydrates. And in this case, for maltose, each of those individual monomers is glucose, which is the predominant sugar in your diet, but there are other types of monosaccharides. Okay, so enzymes are always used in digestion, okay? And they're always going to be using hydrolysis, water, okay? And for the sugars, these simple sugars can be absorbed directly into the bloodstream. And this is also true for our proteins. Proteins, using the correct kind of enzyme for the protein, you will use water. You'll break it apart at the peptide bond, right? And so now you'll have the 2 individual amino acids here. Now, of course, when you're eating protein, it's actually a very, very, very long chain of, amino acids. If you were to think of each of these lines as an amino acid, You have hundreds and hundreds of amino acids in a chain to actually make a peptide. And then your enzymes are going to start breaking those down into smaller and smaller pieces, until finally you get to all the way down to the individual amino acids. Okay, but it's hydrolysis with an enzyme, and it can go directly into the bloodstream. But now with the fats, um, you're still going to use hydrolysis, you're still going to use an enzyme and water, right? And you're going to split this lipid into the smallest subunits. And in this case, that's going to be 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol. This is the glycerol, right? And each of these is a fatty acid. And notice this says C17 and H35. So they're not showing the full structure because it would just be, C, C, C for a very long time, for 17 C's, and then with all the hydrogens coming off, right? And so that just gets very long, takes up a lot of space. So it's easier to just write C17H35. You're probably already familiar with this, but I just want to point it out, refresh your memory. If you ever take biochem, you'll have to be very comfortable with that. Okay, so what's the main point here besides the hydrolysis using an enzyme is that we don't absorb the fats directly into the blood. They actually go into the lymphatic system first. We'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, in part 2. And the other thing you want to remember is that in addition to using an enzyme and water, or to break this down by hydrolysis, you're going to get 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol. Okay, so we talked about functions of the digestive system. We started with moving it through, all the way through from the mouth all the way to the anus. We talked about secretions that are needed to keep it moving and then to also digest it. We started looking at what we mean by digestion. And once you have all those monomers and small subunits, then you're ready to start absorbing those small molecules. And as we mentioned, sugars and amino acids will get absorbed directly into the blood, right? But fats, or fatty acids rather, and glycerol will go into the lymphatic system. Okay, storage and elimination. This is your large intestine. So your large intestine does take in some of the remaining water, but for the most part, and it'll do a little bit of absorption, but the main function is to basically just store it until you're ready to eliminate it. Our immune system is highly, highly active through our gut. And as you can imagine, our GI tract, one reason why it's called a tract is because it's actually a tube that opens at your mouth. The tube goes all the way through and then opens at the other end, your anus. So it's just a tube that allows things from the outside to safely, go through you without having access to all of your body unless it's allowed to be absorbed, right? And so the immune barrier is going to be protecting you from all the stuff that you're ingesting with your food, all sorts of bacteria. Some of it's good bacteria, but some of it's not. Some of it's potentially pathogenic, disease-causing bacteria. You have fungi and other types of microorganisms as well. And you can have chemicals, right? And the body can, not all chemicals we're able to keep ourselves safe from, but some of them we can. So we, again, this immune barrier is really to make sure that you remember that the digestive system is a tube that goes through the body, and that we have all these systems in place to try to keep that safe, right? So we have these simple columnar epithelial cells which control what gets absorbed and what doesn't. And then we have those tight junctions to make sure stuff doesn't sneak through. And then we have a bunch of lymph nodes. We actually have bundles of lymph nodes called Peyer's patches throughout the small intestine, just to give lots and lots of immune support. So if any invaders or potential invaders are found, we can deal with them and prevent infection or quickly clear infection if it does occur. I'm not going to go over all this anatomy. I put this here so that you can review, refresh your memory. Something I do want to point out though is that they show you the duodenum, right? The first region of the small intestine after food passes through the stomach. But it doesn't show you your jejunum and your ileum. So make sure that you also recall where those are. And then after that, then you go to your colon, and it does show you your ascending, your transverse, and your descending colon. So they show you the 3 parts of your colon, but they don't show you all the parts of your small intestine. In fact, they just label small intestine here. And since they label it here at the bottom, that can be a little confusing, right? Because it looks like it comes after, and it really comes first, and your colon is second. And you know this, but this is just a little refresher. Okay. All right, a little more refresher, anatomy refresher for you. I want you to okay. I want you to pause this video and write down these 4 muscles, right? The 4 layers, rather, of the GI wall. Okay, so what are the 4 layers in the correct order from outside moving in towards the lumen? Okay, I want you to also describe the type of tissue and the function for each of these layers. Okay, pause the video. Okay, so I'm going to trust that you paused the video, and I'm also going to trust that you have all the information correct, but anything that you may have forgotten, I want you to make sure you write down and correct it. Okay, so the very first layer, and let's go ahead and get this working. Why does it have to be difficult? I don't know. There we go. Okay, so we have the serosa, right? The first one, the mucosa is the second one, and again, this is from outside in. And then you have that's incorrect. I wrote this in the wrong. I'm sorry. Okay, so mucosa is going to be the most farthest in, right? That's going to be number 4. And then your submucosa would be right below that. It's easier for me to go from the inside to the outside, so I don't know why I'm doing this backwards. But hopefully this is what you have. Okay, so number 1, serosa. What does that do? Well, it's your outermost layer. It's giving you support, right? So this is your connective tissue. So not too much to talk about there, but for number 2, we have the muscularis externa. This is made up of actually 2 muscle groups, you recall. So you have 2 muscle groups, and in fact, I have a picture of it for you on the next slide. And the function of these 2 muscle groups are to work together to move food through, right? And so we call that moving in one forward direction, peristalsis, right? And so looking at this image here, you can see those 2 muscle groups, longitudinal and circular. Yes. And do you recall that these are smooth muscle, right? You're not controlling them. They're automatically being controlled by your body. Um, and you have longitudinal, which will shorten the muscle in length, and then you have the circular, which will shorten the muscle in diameter. And then in your stomach, you actually, which we're not talking about here, but before you get to your GI wall um, of your small intestine, right, you would be in your stomach. And in your stomach, you actually have that additional third muscle group to really help churn and mix the food in your stomach. And that is your oblique, right? So you have in the stomach, you have the circular, longitudinal, and oblique. But in the small and large intestine, you only have the longitudinal and circular. And then your submucosa. Your submucosa is highly vascular, right? You have lots and lots of blood vessels and lymph vessels. And of course, that is so that you can absorb everything that you digest in the lumen can get absorbed through the mucosa, which would be a single layer, and then into the submucosa where the actual blood vessels and lymph vessels are. And so lastly, you have your mucosa, which is your epithelial, simple columnar epithelium, right? So single cell layer. Okay, good. We remember our anatomy. Moving on. So this image here was just to help you to visualize those layers going from the outside, right? In so outermost part, the longitudinal circular muscles that make up the muscularis externa, and then you have your submucosa, which you can see all the vessels, and the vessels are going to be both, your blood vessels and your lymphatic vessels. And then also something we didn't talk about, but we will talk about a lot in digestion is making more surface area, right? Being able to really be as efficient as possible. There's a lot of folds in the intestine to increase surface area. Okay, good. Next. This is another view of the same thing, is showing more parts of your anatomy, right? So going from the outside, right, the serosa, all the way into the lumen down here, right? And so we talked about in those simple epithelial cells, single layer thick. What we didn't mention is that they extend in these long finger-like projections called your lacteal, or rather, we would call it the whole structure that extends, we would call it the villi, and they contain vessels like your lymphatic vessels or lacteal. They also have your blood vessels, not labeled, but okay. What we didn't see in the previous image that we can see here are some of your nerves in your throughout, or that innervate the muscles so they can control the muscles. So you have your muscularis externa made up of longitudinal and circular. And so you have your nerves to control each of those muscles. Okay. So your mouth, right, is where digestion starts. You don't do a lot of digestion in the mouth, but it is important to break it down into smaller pieces to get it moistened with saliva. And so you have the mechanical digestion of the teeth grinding food, breaking it into smaller pieces, mixing it in with saliva. So mechanical digestion is by chewing or mastication, right? Saliva does contain salivary amylase, which is an enzyme, right? It ends with ACE. And this is going to start breaking down those long polymers called carbohydrates, start breaking them down into some of their subunits. So that's chemical digestion when you're using an enzyme. And then when this moves into the stomach, the salivary amylase is going to be denatured. And so then carbohydrates don't get digested in the stomach, but they will get digested again when you get into the small intestine. Mucus is very important, helps to lubricate the food so that you can swallow safely and get it down into your stomach. We also have another enzyme in saliva called lysozyme. I believe we've already talked about this before, but this is a good enzyme to destroy lots of different types of bacteria because lysozyme attacks the cell wall. And so that can help really to prevent infection, especially in your mouth throughout the day or when you're sleeping. Saliva is really important to help prevent dental cavities. So anyone who suffers from dry mouth is at an increased risk of cavities and gingivitis, bad breath. And so you would want to make sure to see your dentist and follow their recommendation. Usually there are special mouthwashes that can be used in this case. Okay, so the stomach is next, but right now we're still in the mouth. So in the mouth, you're not absorbing food. Yeah, there are certain exceptions, like certain medications or tabs that can be put under the tongue to be directly absorbed. But this is not what we do with our food, right? This is not, we don't digest in our mouth. Okay. Now, how does it get from the mouth down to the stomach, right? It has to go through your esophagus. We want to keep it moving downward safely. It can be pushed very quickly. Now, the glob of food that's been mixed with saliva is called the bolus, and the bolus is going to be pushed through those longitudinal and circular muscles that perform peristalsis. They're going to make that wave-like motion, the peristaltic wave that pushes the food down, down, down into the stomach. And so now in the stomach, you can actually start to do some more digestion in addition to a lot more mixing of the food and mechanical breakdown, right? So just a recap a little bit. When you have that food that's mixed with saliva, right, it's the bolus. And so deglutition is the process of taking that bolus of food and swallowing it. Swallowing is a reflex. So as soon as food kind of reaches the back of your mouth, it should be automatic to swallow. And of course, that's going to help push it into the esophagus, and then your peristalsis will take over to push it down into the stomach. And so that's your esophagus pushes that bolus down. You have a gastroesophageal sphincter that here, oops, I'm not, here we go, here. And that's going to help keep any contents of the stomach from going back up, right? Otherwise, you would never be able to bend forward without having the contents of your stomach come back up. I'll try to keep that not as gory as I can. Okay, so gastroesophageal sphincter is here, but we will be talking about different sphincters like urinary, for example. Same idea as the sphincter is always to close something off and only open it when you need it open to like let something in, for example. So it's like a valve. It's like a one-way valve that Yeah. Okay. And then, of course, there's more secretion of mucus because you do not want anything getting stuck in your esophagus. You need it to go down quickly. Okay. Little break from all this heavy science talk, right? So every person has a unique tongue print. That's interesting and weird. Why? It seems unnecessary, but also interesting. That's fun. Not so fun is that as you age, you lose your taste buds. So by age 60, you may only have about half of your taste buds left. Um, which is interesting because if you think about the types of food you eat as a child versus an adult versus older, um, like elderly, we do tend to see like people will change what they eat, what how spicy they like their food, how bland, types of foods will change throughout a person's lifetime, your preferences. Another thing that's interesting about this is that this suggests that then kids have the highest concentration of taste buds, and that might play a role in why kids can be picky eaters. They don't like to eat everything that adults eat. Things probably taste much more intense to them. Um, yeah, interesting. Okay, so aging, not so fun to think about, but is a natural process, and it's important to know and understand. Okay, back to the science. Stomach functions, a little bit of storage, but mostly is to begin digestion. Okay, so you do have enzymes in your stomach, particularly pepsin and some other what we call protease, ACE for enzyme. Protease is protease is to break down protein, right? So protein digestion begins in the stomach. Absorption of substances in the stomach is very limited. We mostly just absorb water. If you were to take aspirin or if you were to take alcohol, that would also be absorbed in the stomach. And certain medications, for example, gabapentin, a common nerve and or epileptic medication. So gabapentin is one of these drugs that is prescribed for several different disorders, and it is absorbed in the stomach as well. So typically, if you have a medication that's absorbed in the stomach, you'll be told to take it on an empty stomach. Whenever you have medication, you should always read the instructions and follow those because they will tell you what you need to do so that the drug can actually work and get the best efficiency out of that. Okay. What else? Secretions, you have stomach acid, right? And so we need to produce that there in the stomach. And the rest of the contents that we refer to as gastric juice, which I think sounds disgusting and we could use a better term. But you secrete the gastric juice from the gastric pits, and then that will mix with your food, which the food came down the esophagus called a bolus. Once the bolus mixes with the gastric juice, we refer to it as chyme. Why? Well, it's ready to be moved. Once it's chyme, it's ready to be moved into the small intestine and have even more digestion and absorption start. So I guess that's why we have different names for it. It also tells you that, specifically that this is your bolus that has now been mixed with gastric juice and the enzymes that are found in the gastric juice, like the pepsin. Okay. And about every 20 seconds, you will have one of those peristalsis waves come through. And remember, in the stomach, you have the three muscle groups for this mixing to make your chyme. Okay. And then about every the stomach will empty in very small portions into the small intestine, about a tablespoon at a time. And so why this is really slow, so that you have time to actually continue to digest and also to absorb. You want to get all the food, all the nutrients out of the food, um, and absorb it. Okay. So here is a picture of the gastric pit. Here, at the top, you can see between the two extensions called villi, right? You have the gastric pits, and the image that I like the best is this image here. Um, sorry, this is, trying to get the pen again. Wow, this iPad really doesn't want to cooperate with me. This is frustrating. Okay, well, just have to use your imagination to follow along with me because I can't point anymore. Um, but on the right hand side of this image at the top, you'll see that there are some cells shown in yellow. And then throughout the next section, you have mostly pink, but some blue. And then below that, you have purple. And so those are actually color coded to show you the type of cell in the secretion that that cell type makes and what role in digestion those secretions have. Much more detail about the stomach. On the left-hand side of this image, you have more of the anatomy, right? We're used to seeing this most inner region that faces the lumen. It's called the mucosa. It's made up of those endothelial cells that extend out into villi, and all of the cells that line the villi, they are different, slightly different cells specialized to make their special secretions that all play a role in digestion. So we have our goblet cells located at the very base of the mucosa. These goblet cells secrete mucus. That mucus is very important in protecting your stomach lining so that you don't digest your own stomach. And then you have your parietal cells. These are shown in pink, and these are going to be secreting, they actually pump hydrogen into the lumen, into the stomach, and then chloride actually will follow passively, and then that makes your hydrochloric acid. So the pump that's pumping the hydrogen into the stomach is a hydrogen potassium pump. This is an active transport, takes ATP, but the chloride will diffuse passively. That is how you make your acidic gastric juice, right? The hydrochloric acid. Then you have in the kind of teal, or the greenish bluish color, are your chief cells. Your chief cells produce a precursor to protease called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is not active until it reaches the gastric juice. It becomes activated into pepsin, and then it can start breaking down protein. Then you have, in the bright blue color, you have your D cells, and you don't have a lot of them. You have a few, and they secrete somatostatin. Somatostatin is an inhibitory hormone, and it actually tells your parietal cells to stop or to slow down, so that you slow down your acid production. So we're done eating. We don't need any more acid at this time. Thank you, we're done. Okay. G cells, shown in yellow at the very, very top, which would be the innermost portion facing the lumen, right? These are called G cells because they secrete gastrin. Gastrin is another hormone. It's going to do the opposite of somatostatin. It's going to stimulate acid secretion. So it's saying food has arrived. We need to get to work. Parietal cells get to work. Okay. And then not shown in this image, unfortunately, you have another important cell type called ECL. ECL stands for enterochromaffin-like cells. So these ECL cells secrete histamine and serotonin. And serotonin plays a role in hunger. And this histamine is believed to help stimulate blood flow through your digestive system. Okay. So what if things go wrong? Maybe you get a break in that mucus layer, right? It gets disrupted, and now the gastric juice can reach the lining of your stomach and break it down. And that is called an ulcer. An ulcer is an open wound, right? A wound that has not scabbed over. You can have an ulcer essentially anywhere. So when it's the stomach, we need to say gastric ulcer so that we know exactly what we're talking about. Most often, people who have ulcers have done something to cause it, such as taking too many NSAIDs, non-steroid, non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs. These are things like your Advil or ibuprofen, also Aleve, naproxen. Okay, these you need to use them carefully. You need to follow the instructions. They'll say to take with food. They'll say not to take more than a certain amount within a certain time frame. All of that is there so that you do not hurt your stomach lining, as well as your liver, which that you need to, your liver and your kidneys are where these drugs are activated and utilized in the body. So high doses or prolonged use can cause an ulcer. And then also sometimes not everyone who has an ulcer has an infection, but there is a large percentage of people with ulcers will have a bacterial infection with H. pylori. H. pylori is the bacteria that can actually dig through the mucus, get through the mucus layer, and get to the stomach lining. And as it's digging through the mucus layer, it's actually releasing some substances. Also, before it gets to the mucus, when it's in the stomach acid, it has a way to rapidly neutralize the stomach acid so that it doesn't get digested by the stomach acid. So H. pylori is able to survive in the stomach very, very well. And some people have H. pylori and it doesn't seem to cause any harm. It tends to be more like just a normal microbiota. So very interesting, because we don't fully understand why some people have ulcers and some people won't from H. pylori. So keep that in mind. Okay, small intestine. Once food has finished with the stomach and has made its way into the small intestine, this is where the majority of digestion will occur. It's also where absorption begins, right? So you had a tiny bit of absorption of just a couple of items in the stomach, but for the most part, absorption takes place in the small intestine, okay? So movement of nutrients from the lumen through the endothelial cells into the submucosa where your blood and lymph vessels are. These are things like amino acids and simple sugars. For the lymphatic system will be your fatty acids and your glycerol. Okay, You make about 9 liters. Um, you absorb about 9 liters a day through your small intestine, but 7 of those liters are actually the digestive juices that you make. But you can see there's a difference of 2 liters. So you need to be drinking lots of water every day, simply for all this mucus and digestive juices, for the process of absorption, right? As well as so many other parts of your body and functions. But as you study each of these systems, you can see why it's so important that you drink enough water. Okay, so to enhance or increase the amount of surface area so that you can do more absorption, you're going to have things like the villi that extend out. And then on each of those cells, go back to here, or even when you see this image, you see how this, the edge of the villi, and each little cell has like a fuzzy looking edge. Those are the microvilli, not labeled on this image. So let's go ahead and see if I can, yes, get my drawing utensil. So here, see how it's kind of ruffled or fuzzy looking. You have the microvilli, and then this unit here and this unit here are called villi, right? So you have villi, which are the large extensions of the intestine, and then on each cell you have the cell itself has little hair-like projections called microvilli. Okay, so that enhances your surface area, and each of those microvilli secretes more enzymes, and we call that brush border enzymes, and that's to finish any digestion, any carbohydrates, amino acids, and even fats that didn't finish getting broken down to their smallest subunit will happen there. So the brush border enzymes complete digestion to give you your monomers, if you're talking about amino acids or carbs, which would be for carbs would be monosaccharides, and also not called monomers, you have your fats, which would be your fatty acids and your cholesterol. Okay, and then now they're as small as they're going to get, they are ready to be absorbed, right, into the submucosa, blood, or lymph. Okay, so this is showing what we just spoke about. You have the villi, and on the villi you have all those individual cells, and on each individual cell you have the microvilli. And this shows how directly underneath that single layer of endothelial cells are your blood vessels and your lymph vessels, called the lacteal. Okay, now to move the contents through the small intestine and deliver it to the colon, you have a process called segmentation. Segmentation is going to squeeze through, as you see here. So the circular muscles are responsible for this segmentation. Segmentation in small intestine for mechanical digestion, to continue to mix, right? Why is that so important? So that your enzymes continue to have access to the food to break it down. Also, so that as you break it down, it's absorbed, and then you continue to repeat this process. You want to move it slowly. You want to move that chyme slowly through. It continues to get digested and absorbed, and then you arrive at your large intestine. So here's an image from an anatomy class years ago, and you can see that the students are taking out the small intestine and seeing how long it is. And this is not even the full length, Average adult has a 7 meters. 7 meters is about 22 feet in length. So very, very long. If you were to open up and completely stretch out all of this tissue of the small intestine, it would have the surface area of a tennis court. So very, very impressive. So now we're done with the small intestine. Large intestine, not a lot to talk about. You mostly have storage. You have a little bit of absorption. Most of that absorption is going to be your water and your salt absorption. You're going to continue to have these muscle contractions every 30 minutes to keep things moving through the colon until it reaches your rectum, and then you release it from the body. So defecation reflex, you have two sphincters. Involuntary, this is what says like there's food here and you need to go to the bathroom. And then you have your voluntary sphincter, which is you saying like, okay, I'm on the toilet, I'm ready to go. You relax it, or you keep it tight because you're not at the bathroom yet, right? So voluntary external sphincter is going to be made of skeletal muscle because you get to control it. The involuntary internal sphincter is a smooth muscle. You don't control it, but that is part of what gives you the cue that you need to go. Okay, so remember that food enters at the bottom of the ascending colon, goes up, then it goes over to the transverse colon, and then down to the descending colon until you get to your, you have the very last portion of your colon, the sigmoid colon, then you have your rectum, and then the anal canal. Okay, so fiber is really important, especially for your large intestine. Fiber helps to make sure your food continues to move, right? So it prevents constipation. There's two types of fiber, soluble and insoluble, and you need to have both in your diet. Where do you get these types of fiber? So some good sources of fiber, you have your whole grains, which should make up the majority of your diet, right? It's the largest portion of your diet should be whole grains. You should be avoiding anything that's not a whole grain. Then you also have your fruits and your vegetables, and those are going to be rich in fiber as well. It's why it's not really good to drink juice, because juice has removed all the fiber and it's just the sugar. So make sure, something like a smoothie, for example, where you put the whole fruit, that's better, right? Because you're getting the fiber. It's just like you were eating the actual fruit or vegetable. Okay, another thing we see in the large intestine is a large community of bacteria. We call it commensal or microbiota, right? What are some good sources of this good gut bacteria? Most commonly, people think of yogurt. Fermented foods are also good. If you are eating yogurt, watch out for sugar. There's a lot of types of yogurts that are just packed full of added sugar. You don't want that. Okay, I think this is part of why Greek yogurt got really popular, is because it's much lower in sugar. But again, always read your food labels, know what you're eating, and try to get the more natural stuff, right? Less ingredients, less sugar. What benefits do we get from our microbiota? Too many to talk about. You could take an entire course on that. It's so fascinating, and there's so much going on. We're still learning a lot about this topic, but we know that we have these good gut bacteria that help digest some of the food that we are not able to digest, and they will secrete some stuff for us, like vitamin K and even some of the B vitamins, the B complex. So they're really important to help us with digestion and vitamins. They also help train the immune system. There's some very elaborate things going on between us and our gut microbiome. I highly encourage you, whenever you have free time, to read about the research that's coming out on gut bacteria. It's good stuff. Okay, now time for you to think about some of the stuff you've learned today. So let's say your friend has intense stomach pain every time she eats. So she goes to the doctor, and the doctor gives her 2 medications for the treatment of a stomach ulcer, but she doesn't understand everything that the doctor said. And so she asks you, knowing that you're taking physiology and you're interested in this stuff, asks if you know and can help explain to her what's the difference between the 2 medications, and is it really important that she take both, or could she just take one because she doesn't like taking pills? Who does? So the first medication, what the doctor prescribed to like an antacid to prevent hyperacidity in the stomach. It's called Tagamet. The second medication the doctor prescribed is an antibiotic. Explain to her why both of these medications are important in the treatment of an ulcer. Explain what an ulcer is, what can cause it, and why these 2 medications can help treat it. All right, pause the video. Okay, I'm going to trust that you actually paused the video and answered the questions. So, as you probably said, the stomach ulcer is an open wound, right? And the stomach acid's able to come in contact with it. And that's why it burns and hurts. That's where the pain is coming from. So, you want to try to reduce the amount of stomach acid and allow that lining to have time to actually heal and have the mucus cover it back over. The antibiotic is to treat that possible infection with H. pylori in case there's an infection with H. pylori that is causing the ulcer. The antibiotic would treat that. And so, of course, it's possible that she doesn't actually have an infection with H. pylori and that there's another cause. And so usually before giving that antibiotic, there would be some type of diagnostic test to determine if the antibiotic is actually necessary. But if she does have that infection, she definitely wants that antibiotic. Otherwise, her lining is not going to heal, and she will continue to have that stomach ulcer. And it can be dangerous. Not only is it very painful, but it can be very dangerous. Okay, so next question for you, the final question. Michael went backpacking with some friends in a pristine mountain location. It was beautiful, and there was no one around. 2 weeks after this trip, he goes to the doctor because he cannot stop having diarrhea. He's getting dehydrated, having intense abdominal pain, cramping, and the doctor diagnosed him with Giardia, which Giardia would be the protozoan that causes it. Giardia intestinalis is the genus and species name, and then the disease we can call a few different terms for this disease, but one is just simply giardiasis, infection with Giardia. So how do you think Michael got this infection? We told you it was a backpacking trip. So think about how would you get infected with Giardia when you're on a hiking trip? And if Giardia colonizes the duodenum and the jejunum of the small intestine, what important process do you think this is inhibiting? And moreover, how can people who go backpacking prevent getting infected by Giardia? So how do you prevent giardiasis? Okay, pause the video. Okay, I'm going to trust that you paused the video. So as you probably said, the Giardia is commonly found in rivers and streams, fresh water sources. They didn't see anyone around. They're in this beautiful, pristine nature, and they assume that that water is pure because it looks crystal clear and there's no one around to contaminate it. What they didn't think about is all the animals that come in contact with the water, and animals can be secreting Giardia and contaminating the water. You cannot see bacteria, you cannot see protozoa, they are microscopic. So even though water looks great, doesn't mean that it is actually safe to drink. And so, how can you prevent this? You would prevent this with the simplest form would be to boil water. Yes, that takes time. You have to give it time to boil, and then you have to, give it time to cool back down before you use it. But that is going to be a great way to kill bacteria and protozoa. Um, Other people that don't want the hassle of boiling water might have some type of filtration. There's all sorts of things when it comes to filtration, small and large, water pumps, handheld pumps, even filters that are in the water bottle themselves. And as you drink, you're filtering it. You'd always want to make sure, though, so Brita filters are not made to uh, make water safe. It's Brita filters are made to take like the chlorine from tap water out so that it tastes better, but they are not for safety. So make sure that you're using an actual camping grade filter if you're going to do that. An older practice was using iodine tabs to disinfect water. That can be dangerous if you don't dilute it enough. It can also taste bad. So that's maybe not as common practice anymore. Okay, that's it. You're done. Bye.